Welcome to the First Sense. How can you find answers in the stars? And how do tarot cards and oracle cards can help us to decipher the challenges in our life? Well, today guests will explain a few things about that subject. And I'm super excited to introduce Dr. Phillip Young as an astrologer and professional spiritual advisor who has been helping with clients since 2013. Dr. Young has drawn on tools like astrology, tarot cards, oracle cards, numerology, the I Ching, and past life regressions to give people the practical guidance they can use in everyday life. What really sets apart Dr. Young is his belief that spirituality is not just something abstract, it's a fundamental part of success and fulfillment in life. He helps people to connect with their own spiritual path, to gain clarity in relationships, navigate challenges, and move them from the stuck point in their life into more positive direction. So, super excited to have you, Dr. Young. And you can tell us what's going on with the stars. And we can start with, what do you think's happening the next 4, 6 years?
Well, it's certainly going to be a lot. One of the things that we look at is what we call outer points, starting essentially with the planet Saturn and going all the way out to Pluto. And there are 5 of them that we take into account. And then we look at their cycles, which are fairly long. So, for example, Saturn will take 29 years to come back around to a point in the sky. And then Chiron, which is the next point that we would consider, takes 50 years to come back around, and so forth. So when points are doing something in particular signs astrologically, we also like to look at the history and go, well, what was going on when they were last in those particular signs? And so the volatility that we're seeing in the world right now has, for astrology, a certain rootedness in these transits that are happening right now. So the word transit is describing the movement of the planets in the sky in relation to astrological information. As an example, Uranus, which deals with breakthroughs and breakdowns and radical change, is currently moving through the signs of Taurus and Gemini. And it takes 84 years to cycle around. And the last time it was in those signs was World War II, Great Depression and World War II. The previous time it was in those signs was the Civil War. And the previous time it was in those signs again was the Revolutionary War. Yeah. So just on that alone, what we realize is that we are in a period of radical transformation that's usually grounded in some kind of disruption that's difficult, basically war. And so that's one component of it. The other pieces that are in play, Neptune, which is another one of the outer points, takes 147 years to come back around to its location. Well, the last time it was in the 2 signs we're experiencing right now was the Civil War. And so we've got now a double sort of implication of what's going on. And then Pluto, which is the slowest moving of the bodies, takes 247 years to come around. The last time it was in Capricorn and Aquarius was the Revolutionary War. So unfortunately, this war theme is prevalent and triple down actually in our time. And so we're really facing a lot of upheaval and people's sense of it being a very chaotic time, a very disrupted time. They're not wrong. And then astrologically, we also look at like, well, what's the time period for which these disruptions last? And generally it's anywhere from 4 to 6 years is when the primary disruption is in place. And we're sort of right in the middle of it. And so from the standpoint of how disruptive it's going to be, it will be this year and next year that will be the 2 most disruptive years. Yeah. Now, what that looks like in terms of, disruption would be, of course, tied to what we have going on in our life circumstances. So this would be in an economic way, it would be the rise of, let's say, something like Bitcoin and a disruption in the economic fabric of the world right now. And the question of what AI is going to mean, which suits the Uranian transit. So through the lens that I look at, it's like, what can I see astrologically? And then I look at the world and go, well, these things are being reflected in the world. And then what most people want to know is how long? I mean, when do we get through, and when do we maybe come to another side, and what's the other side going to look like? And as I said, we're right in the middle. So I feel like the work that I do, sometimes prediction in what I do can be directed in a certain way and say, yes, this is a particular outcome we might have with government or economics or world events. But right now, these particular transits are making it very difficult to say anything other than nobody's getting it right or wrong. Nobody's getting it right or wrong. Yeah. But that there will be, in all likelihood, an alignment of direction by the end of 2027. Whether it's something we like or not, we'll have to wait and see. But I do feel like that every one of these periods, when there's a disruption, it's a 4 to 6 year span. And we're really sort of in the front end of it at this particular juncture in terms of following those transits. Mm-hmm. So, what I have to offer people is that it's a difficult time.
Do you see, there's a couple of things I want to say. Do you see that the changes that have been happening in a World War II and a Civil War, the difference between this time and the other time is the level of consciousness we hold as a humanity are higher than before? We are holding the grid with more love than we had been before?
I'm afraid to say that there's more awareness for various reasons, but are we doing it better than the previous times, historically speaking? That's to be determined. I say, unfortunately, on the one hand, while we've got a lot of, let's say, higher awareness about 5D thinking, we've got a higher awareness of spirituality, we also still have child trafficking, and we still have large-scale corruption. So
yes, we do have all that, but we also have this new Aquarius age that we had not had for a few hundred years, right? So this is a definitely different kind of a vibe. And when we look at that, from the point of view, we do not going to know where we're going to be in 2026, but we can, as a person, can change our little world because we're like a cells, right? Like we are cells in the body. One cell does make a difference to the other cell. So we can hold the vision we want to see in the world and kind of expect that versus just going into, okay, this is where we were, Civil War and World War II. We can see the positiveness in there because I also feel that, unfortunately, the positive growth, the sprouting that I see doesn't get the headline news. It just doesn't. Unfortunately, what we see is what registers in our mind, and that it becomes our reality. But we have to really, really dig deep to see the beauty and the sprouting of the new consciousness that is really growing fast. I mean, you just want to just look around a little deeper.
Well, and again, the opportunity is also dynamic, right? In other words, the idea is that in order to bring about something that could be a form of elevation, a lot of systems have to collapse. And it isn't going to be a matter of fixing these systems. It's that these systems have to actually collapse. And in that collapsing process, there's a lot of difficulty. Now, in terms of what I do and why I enjoy the work that I do is that it really is about working with the individual. And you're right, that the best thing that we can do is try to be as fully realized and as kind and compassionate as we can in our individual journeys, and then hope that that does reach out to a wider world. And certainly there is an understanding, I think, that we see, and this is the case in each of those previous instances as well, is that there was a cycle coming to an end in which a group held a certain kind of power, and they knew that power was eroding, and then they sort of make a last-ditch effort to go for broke. And if we look at what happened in the Revolutionary War, we're talking about really the creation of a new nation state in the United States that was going to change and revolutionize how people looked at government. And that, of course, led to a lot of efforts to suppress that, in terms of revolutionary wars that were not just the United States, but Europe had those as well. And then we look at the Civil War and we realize that we can't go on with a particular type of behavior with regard to the slave trade. And there was a conflict of ideology. And again, you can see very clearly in this red state, blue state stuff that we look at in the United States, that is just a reflection of that Civil War kind of energy. Mm-hmm. But, the thing is that we do individually, I agree with you 100%, is that the opportunity to have a greater understanding of spirituality. 5D thinking is being talked about quite a bit and has a lot of power, but we still have to get to where's the 3D going to show up. Mm-hmm. And I'm rooting for a good outcome, but I also know historically we also have the Dark Ages. So it's like what we have to do on an individual level is the best we can.
I also tell my clients too is that when they start on their journey, and I think this is kind of like we can look at it this like a new journey, is that whatever is not standing on the truth will come down. And the truth is always solid and it doesn't change. The truth doesn't change. It's always the same. So we see the collapses of the systems because it's not based on the truth. Correct. So if you as an individual are standing and getting wobbly, and I always say, like, be ready for distraction if it comes physical, which is like your health going to be challenged, or your relationship, or your finances, or your career. If it's not stable, it will collapse. And I see this around us, like you were saying, it's inevitable because the Aquarius is all about the truth. It's all about exposing what is not aligned with the truth. So that is why we look around. It's like, oh, that one's done. Oh, that one's collapsed. Oh, this one's rotten. And we just have to go back into ourselves and build our own foundation so we can support others during this process, right?
Right. And that's the key is that and one of the things that I enjoy about astrology is that it really is about you as an individual. In other words, if someone said to me, I'm a Taurus, what can you tell me? I'm like, well, I can tell you things about Taurus as a sign, but if you want me to tell something about yourself, I need your chart. I need to know your birth date, your birth location, your birth time. I need to look at that very specific layout of the solar system that was occurring when you were born so that I can make sure to give you the best guidance in terms of your design and then in terms of the larger design of what's going on in the world. So for example, these transits that are happening in my chart, your chart, they're happening in very specific places. And for some of us, they may be very strong. And for others of us, they may just be sort of passing through because they're not activating our particular, energetic field in a certain way. Mm-hmm. But it is just the awareness. And I think one of the, maybe exciting parts of the time and certainly kind of the work you do, the work that I do is that this is a moment where people are going to really be tested. And I have a saying, I mean, you probably do as well. We all have a lot of sayings in our business. And one of my favorites is nobody gets their character tested when things are going their way. So a lot of character testing that's going to be happening at this time.
Yes, for sure. So I heard you saying something like, we have to go back where we casted some dreams 2.5 years ago. That will be very important from September to February 2026. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because that is very intriguing.
So one of the things that's going on now that is, again, marking this time as extremely, extremely unique, even though there are patterns. So what's going on this year is that we have 3 of these points moving between 2 signs. They're going back and forth over them. And that always represents a period of disruption. The fact that it's 3 of them at the same time is significant, but even more so, there are 5 points involved that are changing signs within 2 years. And the last time that happened was 12,000 years ago. So we really are in a very unique time. The thing that you're asking about specifically is that Saturn and Neptune are the 2 that are changing this year along with Uranus. But Saturn and Neptune are going back into Pisces. In fact, Saturn already has. It went back on September 1st. Neptune will go back on October the 22nd. That means they'll spend their last bit of time in Pisces energy, which is our dreams, our visions, our beliefs. And it is really that they are getting tested and really our opportunity to think about where do we want to go from here when these points eventually Saturn and Neptune will move into Aries and stay in Aries. They won't go back to Pisces again after they go into Aries in January and February. So for Neptune, it will be the end of January, and for Saturn, it will be the middle of February. But once they both hit Aries, it's going to be about going forward and really trying to figure out the world we're going to be part of as individuals, the world that's going to be being built up around us. And it's going to move pretty rapidly. But this period now, between now and that February date, is a time of reflection, a time of assessment, a time of maybe even reorganizing and figuring out, where do you need to be, want to be, that is going to be the geographic place, the financial place, the relationship place. That once Aries comes into play, Aries is going to be about looking to the future and being very present, and in many ways not being able to look back to the past for anything because it's all done anyway.
Yeah.
So that's what that is about, as a period. There's an intense period of reflection about belief, and also coming to terms. I mean, one of the things that we got a taste of with these points in Aries is reality kind of being thrown in our face. I mean, an example would be, there's not a solvent country on the planet. There is no country that is actually solvent. Every one of them has borrowed from the future, and the United States has borrowed more than anyone else. And it's sort of like the bills coming due. And what that means is that there's going to be realities around increases in unemployment. Probably will likely see deflation rather than inflation at a certain point, which will mean your assets that you think are worth something, you may start to discover that when you put a house on the market, it doesn't sell very quickly, or you have to, try to sell something that's a large ticket item, and suddenly now it's difficult to do because of these suddenly rapid changes in what's happening in the world with regard to finances.
Yes, I had this conversation with someone the other day. It's just the two words that we have been always taught, right? Liability and asset. And I was thinking, who created these words and where do they get this from? Like, why is it asset and liability liability? Like, if you start thinking about it, it's very muddy because there's nothing more than words, and it's just a situation that presents those as a liability as or asset. It's not the truth. So once again, these two words will be challenged in the
Oh,
daily
yes.
life of people's lives because they were told that this and that has a value. And I even talk about people buying a fancy purses, right? They spend $6,000 for a purse, and they thinking it's a value they can sell on eBay. But if that purse end up somewhere in Zimbabwe and they can find it, they will put potatoes in there and carry it to the market. So it doesn't have the value over there. So it's again, what a reality are we living? Like, who created that? And that is what I see is being destructed, like, and needs to be reconstructed based, like, again, on the truth. And thank you for all that. This is, to me, very important for people to go back and think about what conversation did they had back then, 2.5 years ago. And I find it also very intriguing. One of your services, which I think a lot of people can utilize, is the service where you are helping people to find if the location they want to move to is the right location for them. Can you talk about that? Because I feel it's really awesome.
Oh, absolutely. So it's called astrocartography, or location relocation astrology. And it's actually developed by Jim Lewis. He was the one who wrote the first book about this. And what he did was he realized that if you took someone's astrology chart and you placed it on a map at the point of their location, the lines of energy literally leave from that location and travel around the world. And then if you relocate somewhere, you recast a chart for that person in a new location using their birth date and their birth time, but using a new location. And it lets you know how being somewhere will actually affect your energetic design. So there are places in the world where we have these energy lines that if we're near them, if we live close to them, within 35 to 50 miles of them, we will pick up energy from them. And it's a lot of work that I do now, quite a bit. If people reach out to me and they're trying to find a location, and the interesting thing about it too is that it does involve knowing more than just the lines themselves. Like, for example, if you want to live near water, or do you want to live in a cold climate, there's a line that's going to run wherever you need to be. But also when you're traveling, if you're trying to understand why a certain place was difficult or felt really good to you, the astrocartography a lot of times will reveal that. And of course, it gets really interesting when you're talking about someone that's got family, because you can look at one person's chart, like mom's chart, and say, oh, Chicago, that's great. And then you look at, dad's chart and it's like, ooh, I shouldn't send you to Chicago. That's probably not going to. And so then you have to try to figure, and then you add kids into the mix, and it gets really fascinating. But a lot of times what I love about astrocartography is I always consider it the most testable form of astrology. If you want to know whether astrology works or not, we can do your astrocartography, and I can tell you, go visit this place and see what the reaction is. But it's absolutely one of the most dynamic services that I offer, and people really get quite a bit out of it, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. I wish that I utilized it with you when I moved. I had all my bags packed. It was a while ago, a long time ago, and super excited to move. And one of my friends said, actually, it was a friend that introduced me to you. And she says, have you considered doing this? And I'm like, I can't. I just have everything packed up. Well, I did. So I read it. I was not happy with it. I put it away. And I don't know, like 80 years later, I looked at it. I'm like, yep, 100%. 100%. And I just wish somebody told me before I packed my bags and had my
Of course.
furniture. Yeah, but
Well,
that's what I would say too. If people thinking of moving, and I feel like everybody's kind of doing the shuffle all over
yes.
the world, please consider that, because it's just really need to be in alignment with your soul
Well, and not only
leaders.
that, but as an example, sometimes people are like you. They're like, I have to move here. This is a job transfer or whatever it is. The astrocartography can still be valuable to say, well, this is what you're going to be dealing with energetically. Here's some tools to help you deal with that.
Mhm.
In fact, I had an interesting client that moved to the Raleigh area. She had an opportunity with NC State. Everything on paper looked fantastic. It was like, it's got the great this, that, and the other thing, and lined up with her. She got here and she was just having a terrible time. And she found out about me and asked me about it. And she was living on what's called her Pluto line, which is a death and transformation line. It's like, I wouldn't send someone to a Pluto line unless they had to really go through some experience. And I'd say just short term, or if they were Scorpio, which is the Scorpio, it's ruled by Pluto. But these are the kinds of things where she was like, I don't understand why all of these things look great for me. And then I had this struggle. And I said, well, you're in an energetic line where you're constantly experiencing upheaval. And I told her, I said, look, if you want to just test this theory, go east or west, because the line was running north south. Go east or west about 35, 45 miles and let me know how you feel. And she did. And she called me up and she said, as soon as I got about 35 miles out of town, this pressure on my chest just went away. I'm like,
Wow.
that's how it works. But if you're having to be there, what can I offer you to handle that until you can make a change? If you're in that situation.
Yeah. So I'll have one more question about kind of that stars world, and then I want to jump into this tarot cards, which is super
Absolutely.
exciting. So you were also talking about AI, and then we will have a different kind of conversation next year. I love that. So can you talk about that? Like how in your opinion it's going to shift?
So what I think is going to happen, and I'll use an example that'll seem a little bit odd, but I play solitaire on my phone when I'm taking a break between things. And of course, once I've completed a game, it'll give me an advertisement. And one of the most recent advertisements was for a website company called Wix, where if you want to get a website design, of course, they'll give you the, hey, you can use us and we'll make it beautiful. And now we've got AI to back up what we do. And so this is connected to the Uranus in Taurus Gemini, is that Uranus is currently in Gemini, but it's going to go back into Taurus. And then it's going to go into Gemini in April of next year. And when it goes into Gemini, we won't be talking about AI the way we're talking about it now, because it will just be the way things are.
Hmm.
So if you see a Wix advertisement a year from now, they won't indicate to you that they're using AI. They're just going to be using AI.
Yeah.
And so, the question of what it's going to mean in terms of shift, it will be as certainly significant as the invention of the car or the invention of the telephone. It's going to change the world in a truly fundamental way. And so it's something that's part of the revolution, but it's also something that is right now very much in a developmental stage. There are a number of different AIs that are out there. You've got OpenAI, which is sort of the first one. You've got Google using Copilot. You've got Gemini Google's using Gemini. Microsoft is using Copilot. But the question is also going to be, what are you going to do with AI? And what's the role of government? Now, the probably intended way we're seeing it in the United States is, how many people can we fire with AI, right? And the problem with that is that if your company is doing it and the company next to you is doing it and the company next to you is doing it, who's going to buy your products when you've cleaned out your staff with AI?
Mhm.
So it's one of those short-sighted things where we have to really understand that the impact is part of also these transits that I look at. And it's interesting to me, I don't even need to look at the news anymore. I can just look at where the transits are in the astrology and go, okay, I'm sure I could find something from the news cycle that will reflect this. but the timing of these things are going to run their course. And that's why when I do counsel a lot of people right now, I try to tell them, how can we work best with your situation in the wider scheme of the world? Because a lot of what's going on right now, these things are going to have to play out the way they're going to have to play out. And we won't know really how we're going to fit into them until some of the processes have completed themselves.
Yes, I love the I don't need to look at the news, I just look at the stars. So from the stars going down to the tarot cards and oracle cards, if you can please explain the difference between those two for the listeners. And my story with tarot cards and oracle cards, I lived in Eastern Europe. We didn't have a religion, it was forbidden. But we were allowed to go to the gypsies. So I was around those kind of oracle cards since 12. And then one of the gypsies were teaching me how to do it. And you see, I was always very curious, but they stayed with me because you tell us like why these things are just, what a wonderful tool for our first sense.
Well, so just to make a distinction, a tarot card deck is very specifically designed. It's 78 cards. 22 of those cards are what are called major arcana. And then the other 56 are what are called minor arcana. And there are 4 suits. And it's based off of a game called Tarocchi. So it's literally from a card game. And it's tricks and trumps if you've ever played spades or hearts or something like that. And it's actually, your reference to the gypsies is important because the tarot decks and the cards were used by the aristocracy. But as some of the aristocracy lost their money, lost their way, whatever it was, the decks made it out into the wider world. And the gypsies were the ones to pick them up and start using them in a fortune-telling capacity. Oh. So they were never designed that way, but they evolved into that. Yeah. Now, an oracle deck is any deck of cards that is not 78 cards, 22 majors, the 4 suits and the 56 minors. So an oracle deck can be 100 cards, it can be 32 cards. But if it isn't that 78 cards with that configuration, then it's an oracle deck and not a tarot deck. Mm-hmm. Now, what's the power or the magic of tarot? It is that it is art that is used to help move the mind in a critical way. And some of the best decks have, of course, beautiful artwork that taps into archetype concepts. So if we take, for example, from the tarot deck, let's use, say, the magician card. And that card represents an archetype of how we solve problems, how we encounter things and have to critically think to resolve something. The magician shows up to let us know that we've got to look at a situation and consider it in a lot of different ways because there's an answer there. It may not be the one that we think is most immediate, but the magician is going to find the answer. And so whether you're using oracle decks or tarot decks, the example I will give you is this. Let's imagine you have a difficult issue in your relationship. And you decide to go for a walk one day, and on the walk, you go into a museum, an art museum. You walk up to a particular painting, and you're looking at this painting, and suddenly you realize what you need to do about your relationship, right? Mm-hmm. The painting, for whatever reason, has helped you come to an internal conclusion. Oh, I know now I need to go back and have this conversation with my partner, or I realize it's over, whatever it is. So the tarot deck is kind of like that, but specifically intended when someone comes in and says, I'm struggling with something, let's pull some cards and let's see what the cards show us that you can reflect back against your situation. Mm-hmm. And so whether you do a 3-card pull, a 1-card pull, or you pull 10 cards, whatever it happens to be, we're going to get a narrative from the cards, the oracle deck or the tarot deck, and then you have a narrative that you brought to the situation, and you're going to have those 2 narratives interact with each other, and through that process, hopefully give you an insight or an understanding that you would not have otherwise had.
Mm-hmm. So it would be kind of like you bypassing the logical brain and going more into that intuitive brain. It just helps you to not get stuck into the logic because the archetypes don't necessarily work with logic. They work in stories and they work,
right. At a soul level. So I'll give you a good example of how powerful tarot can be, because I've actually had this one occur. And so let's imagine that someone is trying to quit smoking. Right. Mm-hmm. And they've been to the doctor and the doctor's like, you need to quit smoking. Friends are like, you need to quit smoking. They've watched documentaries about smoking. They're still smoking. Someone comes in to see me and this has happened. They'll sit down across from me and they'll go, I'm kind of concerned about my health. What would the tarot cards show me? And they pull the death card. And the card they pull is the death card, and they turn the death card over, and they see the card, I see the card, and it's like, yeah, you just quit smoking.
Yeah.
That's it bypasses and goes right to that soul level, because especially if it's a well done deck. I mean, the classical deck is the Rider-Waite deck, which is it's a good deck. It's okay, but modern artists have come a long way in terms of really creating some beautiful archetypes. But that's the kind of experience. It's like you can have a question about a relationship, and it's time to call an end to the relationship, and you just don't want to do it. And then you get a particular card from the tarot deck that says, "Yep, you need to face this, you need to address it." It's because that setting and the concept and the energy is it bypasses all of your sort of mind and gets you to it. And it's also an object that's separate from you as well, which is part of its power. It's not just you and I in a dialogue. It's like, hey, there's this card on the table and it's showing you this answer, and it's like, what do you want to do about it? Because it's not me having an argument or a conversation with you. It's like, there's this thing on the table. What do you want to do?
It is wonderful, a tool, especially for intuitive people, because it's not on you. It's like the cards you pulled, not me. You did that. Right. And for example, the death card, if that would show up in that, I would say, oh, you're pretty much done with this. This shows you're done. Not necessarily you will die. Like people would say, oh my gosh, death card means death. No, it also means new beginning. It's like your death of that particular. Yeah. I love working with them, and, teaching even children to look at these beautiful images, and they can connect with them and tell stories. You can start really early on to use this really tool. Like you were saying, it's very ancient. And it's not just for, is he cheating on me kind of thing. It's that's a superficial.
If you've got that question, I usually tell people, hire a private detective. Don't use the tarot card.
Exactly. And I want to make sure that people understand this is not a cheap kind of trick. This is something that is very sacred, and it's done with the most respect. And I love how you're using it with astrology sessions, and you're also using it. I love this one, the listening session, the deep listening session. I saw that. I'm like, oh, that's so cool, because nobody's listening anymore.
And that's one of the things that I have found in a lot of readings that I do for people, is to just be quiet, because they don't get a chance to express themselves without people feeling the need to interject or engage. And so, the idea of active listening is that I will be paying attention. And then if you give me a cue to engage in some way, we could pull a card, I can open up a chart, whatever it might be. And again, to your point about the tarot or the oracle cards, is one of the guidances I give people is when you sit down with the cards, always make them self-focused. And your cheating example is a good example of that. So one of the things that is sort of psychologically unethical is to ask about someone else. Yes. But if you want to know about your relationship, this is the way I coach people to change the question. It's like, well, I want to know about my relationship with my significant other, and I'm worried that they are cheating on me. I'm like, well, if you want that answer, truly hire a private detective. But if you want to use the cards, the question should be, how do I feel about the way I'm being treated? Mm-hmm. And then the cards will give you what you need, because that is a self-focused question. Yes. And you stay in that place of self so that you can get the best answers you can from the cards. Yeah,
I love that. Thank you for the clarification. It's very important people understand that.
Absolutely.
And one of the last questions I have for you is past lives. I feel that it's very important. Some people use it prematurely and they stay stuck in that, these lives that they lived. But there is a value. My mentor, Dr. Norm Shealy, was a very big proponent. I was trained in a past life regressions, and I feel that you could do so much healing. So tell us how you do it.
So one thing that I'll start with sort of a framework. Okay. So when I used to teach, so my PhD, when you refer to me as Dr. Young, my PhD comes from my English degree that I have. And I used to teach critical thinking. And one of the things that I used to talk about with students, and I now talk about with people, is what are called explanatory models. So everything, whether you're talking about capitalism or whether you're talking about racism or whether you're talking about past lives, these are models of explanation. How do things work? And one of the things that I find powerful about past life regression is it's a very comprehensive explanatory model. As I said, racism is an explanatory model, but it's a pretty weak one. I mean, it's easy to disprove, it's easy to show the flaws in, but people like to still utilize it, unfortunately. But past lives gives us this access to, like, why is it, in my example, why did I have a fear of the ocean when I've never had a bad experience at the ocean? Right? The idea is you've got something that you're trying to understand and you try to use just this lifetime and you can't find a good answer. Past lives will give you access to all kinds of information. And then the idea being that, well, why am I connecting with that particular one? What's the work I need to do? And then to be able to do some healing work around it. Now, I can honestly say I understand why I have my fear of the ocean from a past life. It's a very particular one, but it doesn't mean I suddenly want to be a boat captain and a fisherman anytime soon. But I can also go to the beach and enjoy myself, which I couldn't do previously. So it's also about, building understandings, and we do have multiple past lives. And the way I like to utilize past life is to try to help someone understand a pattern that they don't quite have a present life reference for, or to understand maybe a connection with someone and they're like, why this person and I have this? And it's like, well, if you can't find your present life reason for it, let's go digging into the past lives, because there's a very good chance we're going to find an excellent answer there that you can then utilize to help you in figuring out what you need to do to either heal from a type of experience where your souls are coming back together and there was a difficult time. There might also be a reason why someone is in your life that's wonderful, and that you've connected with that person because they were there to help you in a previous lifetime and you made a soul contract to have them with you in this lifetime. But the idea of past lives to me is just a really very good explanatory model for a lot of things that people go, well, why can't I get this explanation from psychology, or why can't I get this explanation from a certain type of logical thinking? It's like, well, because it probably is beyond that. And this tool and this process helps explain that. And so that's how I like to use it, is to help people with problems where they feel like I'm just not seeing what the present moment of it is, or it's bigger than what I understand. It's like, well, let's go explore. Let's go see what past lives have to offer.
Yeah. So when they kind of utilize all the physical aspect of healing and they still feel stuck, then they can look at that. Doloran Cannon is doing a
Yes,
wonderful example of it, like wrote many, many books about it. So if
absolutely.
people want to
Absolutely.
kind of know what that is about, but experiencing it is totally different level. And I would recommend it to anyone who is kind of stuck. So when and how did you bring your first sense, your intuition into all of this? Because you have the qualities of the left brain, you just very logical, and then you are delving into, so it's like a perfect balance. So when did intuition came to your complete awareness?
It's interesting. I'm always oftentimes asked, how did you get into doing what you do? And on some level, I say this jokingly, but not jokingly, is that, I was tracked down and beaten into submission to do this, because this was just, spiritual connection. And a lot of it did have to do with, look, I was a fantastic atheist for about 7 or 8 years. I mean, I was top of the game. I read Daniel Dennett and Hitchinson. I mean, all the guys that are like, the whole atheist thing and logic and all this stuff. I mean, and I used to teach it, and skepticism and all that stuff. And, and I was great at it. And they are very powerful tools, but they are not everything. And when I encountered certain things in my life and these tools were not helping me, then it opened me up to, wait a second, I've got to look at these other tools. And I had always had an interest in astrology and tarot because of the narratives that they created. And then once I had, a couple of crises are really helpful in getting you to, see things from a different perspective. There's a saying now that most people that may be listening to this would not know, but there are no atheists in foxholes. And of course, a foxhole was what they dug in World War I in the trenches, and the bombs are going over and the bullets are going over. And at that point, nobody is just thinking about, not praying to something, right?
Yeah.
But what happened is that the tools weren't comprehensive enough. And then when I started working with astrology, utilizing tarot cards, delving into past lives, answers came that could not have come any other way. And then I have my own intuitive abilities, my own sensitivities that, again, as a guy, you tend to have it repressed. And then also you're in a culture that tends to be repressive about it, all this stuff. But it doesn't change the fact that if you have a sensitivity, and we all have a level of it, we don't have the same level. I mean, some people have very high sensitivity, and some people have moderate sensitivity, and some people actually have low sensitivity. But the idea was that a certain confluence of my desire to find solutions, and I was using tools that were coming up short. That meant that I had to look beyond just those tools, and here are these other tools that are very different and very interesting. And my brain is like, well, let's give it a try. And then once I incorporated that, I was like, wow, this is giving me as much as I can do to be as helpful to people as possible. And that's where it started.
So you do need an open mind, though. That's the thing. People
absolutely.
are not, yeah, without the open mind and being flexible, it's very little you can do to expand your consciousness. Well, we come into the end of our show, and it was just very, very informative. Is there anything else you want to share? Because I do have one last question for you, but I'll leave it to the end. How did people can find you?
Sure. So my website is Black, BLACK, unicorn, but it's spelled UNYKORN.com. So if you go to blackunicorn.com, you can find out about my services and about my practice and how to get in touch with me, set up an appointment if you want to. And this is my full-time work. So I work 7 days a week. I have clients from all around the world. So sometimes I'm up at 7 a.m. to talk to someone in Australia, and sometimes I'm up till 11 p.m. to talk to someone in Hawaii. So the idea is that, and the beauty of technology is the ability to connect with people all around the world. So that the best way to reach me is to come through my website, and you can find out all about me and how to get in touch with me.
That's wonderful. I do remember our first session, and I just looked at it not too long ago, and you are so right. Everything was on it. It was just sometimes you don't see it at that moment, but if you keep it, and it was a long time ago. If you keep it like, wow, yes, everything is coming to fruition. So my last question is, what message would you like to leave with our listeners to help them trust their first sense, their intuition, and to live with the alignment of the soul?
So what I would offer to people is that you really do have to go through a process of trying to understand your own individual journey. And that's what these tools that I use really try to help. First of all, in a way, make clear is that we have this very unique journey that we're on, and that we are doing our own individual soul work, and that connects us to the wider world. The other message I would leave in terms of right now is that we're very much caught in liminal space. And liminal space or liminal state is the state between something being left behind and trying to get somewhere else, but you're not there yet. And this is a very difficult space for us to be in, and it is persisting and it is challenging. So it comes down to also being able to be very present in what brings you joy, connects you with the people that matter, and really trust that you also chose to be here during this particular time to have these experiences. But be willing to explore and try the tools out. You'll find that they really can be amazing, and it isn't to put aside still doing other things that we look at in the world that we have to take care of. I mean, my particular story was when I decided to do this full time, I was out in my backyard and talking to spirit, and I said, look, if you want me to do this, just realize that this house that's over here next to me needs to be heated and cooled. This body has to be fed. It's a 3D experience, and there's this thing called money that we use to exchange energy, and that's really all money is just a holder of energy. But these things have to be, if you want me to do this work, these things have to be taken care of, because I'm having to have this 3D experience. So it is navigating the part that is 3D, but also the part that's spiritual, and finding your own individual way. And what I like to offer is, if you need some help along the way, I would be happy to help you if you feel like you are struggling.
So thank you very much for today. I hope this conversation had inspired you and connect you with your first sense, your intuition. And remember, it is original sense, right? So it's holding the key to transformation in our life. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and you won't miss the next one. Until then, trust yourself, listen within, and keep honoring the wisdom of your soul.